impact that churches have had around the world. Like the first hospital that was provided free care for people was a church hospital. Think about all the institutions that we value, places like Yale and Harvard. You know, they were all started by the church. And we have to ask ourselves, why were they started by the church? It's because church is actually more than just church, but it's about having a faith community. And community is really important because we weren't created to live alone. If you think about an oak tree, can an oak tree grow up and be something else? No, it can't. An oak tree will grow up to be an oak tree. Similarly, we grow up to live in community. It's part of our divine nature. So if this is part of our identity and divine nature, then it's something that we need to think about because we were designed to live in the shelter of each other. Nobody is meant to live alone. It's kind of all beautiful and incredible, and you're so in love with the idea of being in love, and then you have to deal after a number of months with what the real person's like, right? And I think that we deal with community the same way. We want to have this idyllic community where everyone's nice. Nobody asks anything of you that you're not willing to give. And everybody's fantastic. And then we get disappointed because, like all relationships, community doesn't turn out to be that way. Community is an inherently difficult, sometimes messy thing, but it exists for a very real purpose. And I want to talk about that. So communities are made up of flawed people, and nobody's perfect, right? But just like bowling alone, you cannot do spirituality alone. There's a great movement out there that says, you know, well, I don't really affiliate with a particular religion or a particular church. And I think that's fine. But you can't be without some kind of faith community because you can't grow all by yourself. You can do certain things. You can read, you can study, you can gain insights. But the rubber hits the road when you try to apply it, and you cannot apply it by yourself. That would be like me trying to serve myself. Oh, would you like a cup of tea? I'd love a cup of tea. You get a cup of tea, you know. You need to be in relationship with people in order to express your spirituality. And that's why it's a myth that, you know, people say, well, you know, I believe in God, but, you know, I don't really need a community. But I would say we all need a community because we need to grow. So I want to talk a little bit about growing this morning. Now, we want to be a loving person. We want to be, we think that inside our head, we're all great, right? Inside my head, I'm a really loving person. But I only discover I have a challenge with that when I have to love someone that I find difficult to love. Or I might say, like, yeah, you know, I'm chill about forgiveness. I can forgive anybody until somebody hurts me. And then I really struggle with forgiveness. So this is why we need community, because you can grow to a certain extent just by studying and learning. But to really grow, to become perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect, you need to be in relationship with others. And this is the value of community and why I think you just have to find the right community for you, right? Now, the thing is that it's difficult, you know, even though we want to have close friendships with others and really enjoy community, sometimes it's difficult because we feel the barbs of other people. I want you to think about a pet. Who would have a porcupine for a pet? You would, right? Actually, I have a friend at work who has a hedgehog for a pet, and I think they're kind of closely related or something. But generally speaking, when we think about pets, we don't think about porcupines. And the reason that we don't think about porcupines for pets is because they have big barbs. And the way they work is, when they're frightened, they will set off these quills. And when these quills enter the flesh of another, there's a kind of chemical reaction, and then it causes incredible pain and expands, and then you can't get it out, right? So porcupines don't make great pets because they have these barbs that they let off whenever they're frightened. And they either do that strategy, or the other strategy they have is just to withdraw. And this is why I say to you that we find community so difficult, is because we're like a bunch of porcupines trying to relate to each other. So we too have lots of quills. So, you know, out of our quills, you know, our quills might be barbs like resentment. You know, you go up to be nice to someone and then they start like, you know, it's spewing all this stuff about their latest resentment. Or they're unkind. Or what about the person who's always complaining? And actually we all do this to a certain extent. We're like the porcupines. Now the other strategy that the porcupine has, you know, is you either send out these quills or you can withdraw. And then you kind of want to be all alone. You don't talk to anybody. And you kind of avoid relationship. And then after a while you go like, why is no one my friend? You know? But you've set up these invisible walls around yourself. And we tend not to think about that. I was having dinner the other night with a friend. She's a spiritual blessings coach, and she does all kinds of work to help people release the blessings in their life. And she was going to a workshop, and in the workshop, this facilitator said to the group of people, okay, I need one volunteer. This one volunteer has to go out of the room. And so the volunteer left the room, and everybody else in the room, this facilitator, I think it was a he, said to her, okay, now everybody, I want you to collectively imagine a wall, okay? And I want you to decide together where in the room this wall's going to be. So they all envisioned a wall, they decided they're going to put it over there, and that's what they did. Then they invited the person back in the room who'd been outside the room, and the facilitator said, you know, just wander around the room freely, you know, go wherever you'd like to go. And she said it was so fascinating because where the imaginary wall was, the person didn't avoid it. Now, no one told her the wall was there, but she sensed something was over there. One day my friend was walking down the road, and you know how sometimes you walk down the road in the country and then a dog starts following you, and some of these dogs aren't like just nice little pets, they're like big dogs. And she realized, oh, I'm being followed by a dog. What can I do? She felt a little nervous. So she thought, you know what, I'm going to put a wall up. So she turned around, and between her and the dog, at a certain point in the road, she imagined this imaginary wall, and she put up a wall. And then she turned back around and she carried on walking. And then all the way down the road she turned around and she saw this dog pacing back and forth exactly at the spot where she placed the imaginary wall. You know, I think we forget that we put out signals. So we may feel like we're being very friendly and everything, but if we don't really want to let someone inside, guess what? They feel your wall. We all put up walls. We either, you know, sometimes when we're afraid, we put out jabs to people, like this gentleman here, or similarly, we can put up walls. So how do we get beyond that? How do we get close without being hurt? Because in community, people are afraid of getting hurt. That's why people avoid communities. You know, they don't want to deal with it. So what does the porcupine do when it mates? Because inevitably, have you ever thought about this? How do porcupines mate? Yeah. So there's something called about the dance of the porcupine. And what they do is they kind of put their quills back, and they get up on their hind legs, and there's something called a waltz of a porcupine where they even kind of like dance together. And they, you can't really see it in this picture, but they kind of put their quills away from each other, and they put up their paws, and there's the waltz of the porcupine. And if we want to live in community, we have to do that too. This is why to grow spiritually, you need community. Because, you know, if you were just hanging out by yourself, little porcupine self, like, you know, the gentleman before, you're not really worried about, you know, your quills, you know, being out there. But if you care about relationships, you're going to have to put your quills back, right? And you're going to have to let down those walls and let other people in. So actually, I think the porcupine is a really good example of that. Because ultimately, there is no joy in being alone. And when we're not alone, we feel so happy. And I want to show you this beautiful picture I found on Facebook from a site, All This Is Interesting. And I thought this is such a beautiful picture. Because imagine that little boy walking home from school alone by himself and it started raining. What would his face look like? His face, he'd be down, he'd be looking down, he'd be kind of scrunched over. He'd feel kind of a little bit cold, and he'd feel miserable. But he's in the shelter of his friend. And his friend has this, like, quickly made umbrella. And because of that, I just love the expression on the face of the little boy. It's so beautiful. That is what community is about. And when we have community, even though we face the most difficult things, we can do it with courage, we can do it with happiness and with an element of joy. Of course we're going to be miserable, but we can face it because we're not facing it alone. So this is why, community is important. And it's a real myth. It's a total, like if someone says, well, you don't need church, and I'm not saying you have to join a registered church, but I'm saying you need a faith community. You need somewhere where you can talk about what matters most. I want to give you an example from the Bible. The Bible is amazing because it's full of these incredible stories whose purpose is, whether they happened or not, is to teach us about love. They give impressions of love. And we can learn a lot from it. The Bible is full of all kinds of secrets to successful living. That's why it's lasted 2,000 years. You ever thought about that? Jesus was crucified 2,000 years ago. We're still reading the same book. The stories haven't changed. Why? Because those stories contain the secrets for successful living. That's why they're compelling. So I want to tell you a story today about the story of a paralyzed man who was taken by his friends to see Jesus. Now this man, they had some kind of pre-Twitter going on because Jesus went back to Capernaum and everyone found out, oh, he's in Capernaum, he's at this house. So what do they want to do? They wanted to go there. Can we see him? Can we sit in the front row? Can we jam in? Can I get a ticket? It's kind of all this kind of thing. And they rushed to the place where Jesus was. Now these friends had a friend who was paralyzed. They wanted him to see Jesus because they believed that if he could see Jesus, he could be healed. So they said to their friend, who probably said back to them, you can't take me, I'm too heavy, you're going to have to carry me, it's not going to work, the room's going to be full, we'll never get in. Besides which, I don't really feel about like being around a bunch of people because I am paralyzed. I mean, back in Roman and Greek culture, people with disabilities were routinely left to die. They did not take care of people with disabilities. And so he himself probably felt like ashamed. Just like sometimes we feel ashamed. We don't want to go somewhere because we don't have confidence. But this guy had friends. So his friends go, don't worry, we're going to get you in, don't worry. So they got to the house, and the Bible says they couldn't get in because even the door was jammed. There was no way. But this guy had friends because he lived in the shelter of his friends. And they said, don't worry. Now, it was very convenient because at the time, the architecture of the day is there was an external staircase that led up to the roofs of houses. I don't know whether you've seen pictures of homes in the Middle East, but they have very flat roofs, right? And this is like a patio roof. So his friends go, don't worry, we're going to get him up the external staircase, get him to the roof, and then we're going to dig through the roof and get into the house. That's audacious. Would you do that for a friend? Do you have friends that would do that for you? Now, this task was not impossible because the way they built houses back then is they had beams that cut across the roof, and then they would put like mud and they would put, vegetation to make a roof. So, this is not their house. And they start like, digging away at the ceiling so they can drop the man through the ceiling and into the crowd below right in front of Jesus. That takes guts, with a little bit of stupidity thrown in. But he had friends like that. Why did they care about him so much? Because they wanted him to be healed. Now it's very interesting because in the Bible, many times when people are brought to Jesus to be healed, he actually proclaims to the person who needs healing, your faith has made you whole. It's that person's faith. But when Jesus saw this, and he could have said security, and had them thrown out. And I'm sure there were people in the room that were going, security, But actually Jesus didn't. He looked at this guy, and he looked at this group of friends that carried him in, and said, because of their faith. So it wasn't just the person's faith, it was because of their faith that he was healed. And of course, there were all the naysayers, all those like intellectuals in the room that said, "Oh, how can you forgive sins? Only God can do that." And Jesus just turned to them and said, "Would it be easier if I just said, get up and walk?" Because I could say that too. But it was because of their friends, that man's friends, that he could be healed. This shows the importance. It's a beautiful story. And I want to, even go home and read that story. It's an incredible story because it really talks about the power of love. Because even God has to be humble before true love. Like, maybe Jesus goes, this isn't the right protocol, people. But in front of true love, Jesus was humble. He said, I have to heal this man. Even though he broke all the rules, he tried to sit in the front when other people were already there. Everything about the setup was wrong. But the heart was right. And the heart of the friends was right. And that's why that man could be healed, right? The man couldn't have made it without his friends because he was physically paralyzed. And actually, we can't make it without our friends. We may not be physically paralyzed, but we're emotionally paralyzed. We're afraid. We don't feel worthy. We have too many hang-ups. Whatever your problem is, in some way, it paralyzes your life. We're emotionally paralyzed. I know sometimes I'm emotionally paralyzed because I don't know what to say to my kids about something. It's a form of emotional paralysis. So I can just live by myself and worry and stress about my emotional paralysis. Or I can live in the shelter of others and ask for support, ask for advice, ask for someone else to talk to my kids. I like that idea. I'll be talking to you later. We're all stuck on a mat in a kind of a way. And so if we don't let our friends in to help us, then we too cannot be healed. And we usually don't because we're too proud. We're either too proud, which is a form of arrogance, or we're too ashamed. A form of lack of self-esteem or timidity of spirit, if you like. I wanted to just give a quote from a sermon that Reverend Moon gave, kind of on a similar topic. And he said, "What is the most fearful among all the diseases, even for God? It is the disease resulting from the human fall. Do you have this disease or not? Yes, you have it. But most people don't even realize they're afflicted. That's a problem. They don't realize they're afflicted. They go like, I'm okay. I'll go to the mall, I'll do whatever. I don't need to think about this kind of stuff because I don't have a problem." But actually, God's headache is that people do have a problem. These days, everyone fears cancer. In its early stages, a person may not realize he's ill. He only recognizes that he has a disease when it becomes painful, but by then the cancer has progressed to a lethal stage. Still, at least a cancer victim knows he has the disease before he dies. With the disease of the fall, however, people don't recognize they're ill until after they die. That is a problem. It's so precious that we have this life on earth because the life on earth is where we can deal with the problems, because we can grow, because we have each other, because we can learn, we can improve, we can come closer to God, we can put those quills back, we can let down the walls, we can allow others in, right? So I want to ask you to think about, who will you carry? Whose mat will you carry? But also, who will carry your mat? We need to be there for each other. The man on the roof, he didn't lower himself in. His friends lowered him in. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not inviting you to do this and call me. Do you have someone you can call at 3 a.m.? Because everyone needs someone they can call at 3 a.m. Do you have someone who prays for you, not just in an emergency, but on a regular basis? And actually, one of the members of our community, because of a disability, he's not able to get here on a regular basis. But he told me, if anybody needs prayer, can you let me know, because I want to pray for them? That's beautiful. We need to live in the shelter of each other. We need each other. Do you have someone that you can share your victory with? A victory is hollow if you can't share it. You can't have some incredible accomplishment and then you've no one to tell. That is the definition of loneliness. And God does not want us to be lonely. We weren't created to be lonely. So, our real friends are the friends who care about us. And what part of it? Do they care that we have a nice house? I mean, it helps. Do they care that, we have a great career? It helps. But a true friend cares about your heart, your character, what you're going through. They care about your soul. And that's why the friends of the man in the Bible were so powerful, because they cared about this guy's soul. They were willing to rip a roof apart. They probably didn't have Legal Shield either, so that was a problem. But they cared about the guy's soul. And we need to care about each other's souls, right? I was struggling to understand one time about how God sees us. And we need to be reminded of that. And a true ministry is a ministry that can really help others and be there for others. And this is why I'm so moved by Mother Teresa's ministry, the work that she did in her life. Because she said, and this is why you need community, she said, it's impossible to say that you love God, but you don't love other people. Because, you can go around in holy robes and, do rituals and love God. But if you can't love people, can you really love God? This is why we need community, and we need a spiritual community to support our growth and development. Because it's in the spiritual community that we experience the true love of God for each other, and we experience God's love as it flows through us. There's a very special pastor who was very famous. His name was Dallas Willard, and he said that in order to really understand about God's love, you need to be in unity of spiritual orientation. And I want to explain what he meant by that. Because he said, think about God's love as like a river flowing. And if you're like a pipe, right? And if you're like just at right angles to the flow of that river, you might block the river from flowing below that point. You might create a dam, or at least you inhibit the flow. But when you're in the right spiritual orientation and you turn that pipe in the direction of the flow of the river, then all of a sudden, all of that river can flow through you. So Dallas Willard was saying, we need to make sure that our spiritual orientation is right, such that we can allow the love of God to flow through us. And I think that was the power of Mother Teresa's ministry, is that she understood community. She understood that you can't just love God in the abstract, that you have to love God in everyday life. You have to love God by loving the people around you. You have to allow God's love to flow through you. You have to have the right spiritual orientation. And I think that having the right spiritual orientation is really about putting yourself in that place where God's love can flow through you. And I want to close by quoting from a prayer that Reverend Moon prayed. That was really, we know that the main problem here is not which denomination, which religion, or which group of people we belong to. The viewpoint of truth, the entirety of truth, is to have an inward heart that thou can recognize, and to go forth with an earnest heart that can experience thy heart. O Father, grant us to know thy heart. That is a beautiful prayer. That is a prayer that you can pray by repeating those words, by saying, grant me, let me know your heart. That's like how to shift your pipe around, to get the right spiritual orientation, that God's love can indeed flow through you. Our life is precious, because when we go to the spiritual world, Reverend Moon talked about how, we kind of have a kind of cancer and we don't even know about it, kind of thing. You don't want to go into the spiritual world unprepared. In the spiritual world, there isn't like physical, O2, like atoms of air. The atmosphere in the spiritual world is love. So if you haven't learned how to breathe in and breathe out love, then you will go into the spiritual world, but you'll always feel like you're slightly suffocating, Have you ever been in a situation where there's been a shortage of air and you're kind of suffocating? You can't breathe. I know people with asthma feel that. We don't want to go into the spiritual world with a form of spiritual asthma where we can't get a full breath. And we can't even breathe out. Like when you have asthma really badly, your ability to even breathe out is compromised. But we want to be able to fully breathe in and breathe out, which means we have to learn how to love. And this world is an incredible womb in which we can learn how to love. So when we go to the eternal spiritual world, because this is temporal, when we go to the eternal spiritual world, we can freely love. So what is the womb, or what is the place where we can learn that? It's community. So as little as our community is, as inadequate as it is, as weird as it is, remember the title of the book, Everyone is Normal Till You Get to Know Them. You know, every community is just a family, an extended family of really weird people. Myself included. But, you know, together we can help each other. Together we can receive forgiveness. Together we can learn how to put our barbs back like that porcupine. We can let down the walls. We can allow each other in. We can allow ourselves to be healed. And we can become the people of true love that we want to be. So thank you for coming today. Thank you for being here, for being in community. Thank you for being my friends. I hope I can be a good friend to you, and we can go places together. Please join me in prayer.